Akshay Nanavati, welcome to the show. When I think of the mental fortitude that it takes to accomplish things that he's done, it absolutely amazes me. Not everybody gets an endorsement from the Dalai Lama. You've run ultra marathons, you've climbed mountains in the Himalayas, you've spent 10 days in darkness and isolation, skied 350 miles across the world's second largest ice cap. You actually lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Why do you do this?
Because ultimately, what do we all seek in life? You know, we're seeking the rapture of being alive.
Welcome to the Labrada Show.
Brought to you by Lean Body, the #1 protein shake in gyms across America.
Welcome back, you guys. As you know, our mission on the Labrada Show is to help you improve your physical, mental, and spiritual health. And there are things that we can learn when we speak to people who have overcome incredible odds to accomplish extraordinary things. My guest today is such a man. When I think of the mental fortitude that it takes to accomplish some of the things that he's done, it absolutely amazes me. You know, what's even more amazing is the fact that he is now attempting the first ever solo crossing of Antarctica without dogs, kites, or any assistance. That's right, the Antarctic, the coldest, harshest place on Earth. All 1,700 miles, coast to coast, in 110 days. My guest has been featured on Forbes, Entrepreneur.com, Fast Company, Inc. magazine, Bloomberg, Runner's World. He's the author of a new book titled Fearvana, which is available on Amazon. Akshay Nanavati, welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much for having me.
You have an amazing story, my friend, and I want you to tell us the story. But first, I'm going to just call out some of your accomplishments for our viewers. You've run ultra marathons, you've climbed mountains in the Himalayas, you've spent 10 days in darkness and isolation, skied 350 miles across the world's second largest ice cap, and you've skied up a glacier in Antarctica where you actually lost 2 fingers to frostbite, is my understanding. That's just amazing. Akshay, I want to get into your head. What motivates you to do these things, and why do you do this?
You know, the birth of everything I am today, the drive to push myself the way I do and play on these edges, it began when I joined the Marines. That birthed the very essence of Fearvana and everything that I am. Because before joining the Marines, when I moved to Austin, Texas at the age of 13, I got very heavily into drugs, into alcohol. I moved from Singapore, India, where I was born, and was very self-destructive, wasting my life away until I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. You ever seen that movie?
I have. It's a gripping movie. Yeah.
That movie touched my soul, and watching these men giving their lives up for another human being, it had me question this worthless existence I was living, and almost overnight stopped doing drugs, enlisted in the Marines. It took me about 1.5 years to get in because I have a blood disorder that 2 doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. It's called thalassemia. It transports about 25% less oxygen through my body than what is supposed to be. Wow. So I had to fight my way to get into the Marines. And in the Marines, I started to discover the beauty of suffering, of going to war with the self and finding something in the human spirit to transcend that struggle and keep moving forward. Because Marine Corps training was hard, obviously, right? And more so than just doing it for the self, it taught me the value about doing it for a group. Because in the Marines, you live for the good of the group. Nobody cares about your well-being. It's about the mission and the men. And there's something profoundly beautiful about living in a world like that, you know? So after joining the Marines, that's when I got into outdoor sports and started playing on every edge I could find to explore the limitlessness of the human soul that lives within each of us. Because I used to be scared of everything, like scared of heights, scared of tight spaces, scared of open spaces, scared of open water. So I went rock climbing, skydiving, mountain climbing, cave diving, scuba diving. I mean, you name it, to confront my fears and keep growing in that process.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because I think that, from a personal development standpoint, at least I can say that whenever I've had fears in the past, that a lot of times facing those fears, frontally facing those fears is the best way to get through them. So let me ask you this, since we're talking about fear, how do you keep fear from entering your head?
To me, it's not so much about not letting it enter. It's about what I do with it once it does. I mean, I'm scared of going to Antarctica. I should be scared of spending 110 days completely alone in one of the most hostile, unforgiving places on the planet, it's terrifying. It's terrifying because of the depth of solitude, the amount I will have to suffer to pull this off. It's never been done before. But forget even just about Antarctica. Last week I got married.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We've only been dating 6 months, but going on a date with my now wife, I was terrified. I had literally anxiety in my belly, so even these kind of quote unquote normal things scare me compared to Antarctica, but I don't care when the fear is there. What matters is I've now trained myself to be with that experience, to normalize it, to not resist it. The greatest enemy of fear is the resistance of fear. It's the fear of fear. Like that quote I've heard when it says the only thing to fear is fear itself. I don't actually agree with that. I think it's resisting of fear and fearing fear that is the problem. Fear is a very normal human emotion. It will show up. It shows up for me all the time. And I do some of the most intense things a human being could do. But I don't care that it's there. When it's there, I pause, be with it. I acknowledge its presence within me.
Okay, so let's say that you have or you're experiencing a fear, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do to control that, or to just kind of get your head wrapped around it and control it in the moment? What are some things that our viewers can learn to do whenever they feel fear welling up in them?
The first step is just to kind of pause. It's pause, acknowledging the presence of the fear. You can even label it. Neuroscience has shown that when you label an emotion, it reduces activity in the limbic brain, in the emotional parts of the brain, and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain related to focus and awareness. So essentially, when I stop and say, God, I'm feeling nerves, I'm feeling fear, I'm feeling anxiety, whatever it may be, you're creating a space between you as the feeler of that emotion and the emotion itself. Because for many of us, when we have an emotion, we just react instead of responding. So when you pause, and depending on the context of the fear, in this case, like going on a date, for example, I felt it. And even as I was driving over to her, I was having this anxiety. The whole drive, I was just like, God, I'm nervous. I'm going to just be with that. I'm still driving over to her, and drove over. I literally told her on the second date there, I was like, I was terrified of this, and that alleviated the fear. But for example, like writing a book or something like Antarctica that has more of a lead up time to it. What I do when I'm scared is I will ask myself, why am I scared? And I write this down. What am I scared of? What's the worst case scenario? And then how do I prepare for that worst case scenario? So whatever the fear is, you can use it. You can engage it and then use it. Like one of my many mantras is fear propels you to prepare. It can be one of the most valuable tools to prepare for whatever the thing that's coming. If you're starting a business, writing a book, getting kids, all of these things might be scary, right? But that's good. What am I scared of? Why am I scared? Let me engage it. And then how do I start preparing for that outcome that I'm potentially nervous is going to happen?
I love that. Engage it and then start preparing.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about your book, because that kind of segues into this. And guys, if you haven't already done so, pick up a copy of Fearvana on Amazon. It is an amazing read. You've done a great job here, Akshay.
You,
and even the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama says Fearvana inspires us to look beyond our own agonizing experiences and find the positive side of our lives. Wow. Not everybody gets an endorsement from the Dalai Lama.
I was very honored. It was a huge honor to make that happen.
So Fearvana teaches the science of how to transform all of your seemingly negative emotions into a healthy response, and puts you on the path to happiness. Okay. So my recollection is it gives you the tools that you need to handle fear and stress and anxiety and turn those into something positive. Can you elaborate a little bit on that with some highlights from the book?
Sure. That core essence of the teaching is to stop and combat the demonization of these quote unquote negative emotions, the fear, the stress, the anxiety, guilt, sadness, anger. We live in a world that labels and demonizes these emotions as bad, but they're not bad. They're more challenging than some other emotions, but they're not bad. They're not good, because there are no bad or good emotions. There's only emotions, and it's up to us to decide what we do with those emotions. So it started, that journey to sharing this began because after the war, when I came back from Iraq, I really struggled. I was diagnosed with PTSD, struggled with depression, was drinking a bottle of vodka a day. I'd be throwing up in the toilet, picking up a bottle again, until one morning I was seconds away from picking up a knife and slitting my own wrists. And I learned after I hit that rock bottom and I started going into neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, confronting my own demons from the war. And in that process of climbing out of my own abyss, I learned that these emotions I was going through were not bad, and everybody suffers. Everybody goes through stress. But if we view them as bad, then we resist them. And that's the real problem. As a very concrete example, and I talk about this in the book as well. Like, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, but I had symptoms like I was nervous around crowds. I was very hypervigilant of loud noises. I struggled with survivor's guilt because I lost a close friend of mine in the war. And everybody told me, like the therapist, and I was diagnosed that these are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But as I started doing all this research, I learned that these were normal responses to war. They were not a quote unquote disorder. I spent 7 months in a place where loud noises meant death. Inevitably, I was hypervigilant. So yes, I had post-traumatic stress, but post-traumatic stress does not mean post-traumatic stress disorder. And by ascribing that label disorder to my identity, it completely reframed my relationship to the post-traumatic stress. So when I stopped ascribing that label, when I said, got it, I have post-traumatic stress, but that's not a disorder. These are normal human responses to war. Now what can I do with it? So as an example, my guilt, I realized that in war, you can't control what happens. When I was in Iraq, my vehicle drove over a bomb, an active bomb that didn't explode. My friends drove over an active bomb. It exploded. He was killed. No idea why that happened, right? Everybody said, don't feel guilty. It's not on you, things like that. And I get it rationally. But emotionally, it didn't change the fact that the guilt was still there, because the guilt was simply an expression of love for my brother. That's all it is. It's an expression of love. So instead of demonizing it, instead of resisting it, I reframed it. For a long time, I had a picture of my friend that I lost in the war up on my wall. And it said, this should have been you. Earn this life. My guilt became my fuel to write Fearvana, to help others navigate these so-called quote unquote negative emotions, because every emotion can be transformed into something incredibly beautiful when you engage it consciously.
Do you feel that writing Fearvana was cathartic for you?
Very. It taught, like, even the research, when you read it, like I read 100 books as research, if not more, for it. So researching it, going through the process of writing, because as you know, when you teach, you learn more.
Yes.
To teach something to somebody else, you have to learn the subject even better. So it taught me more about all of this. And then also the people I interviewed, the people I interviewed in the book. I mean, these are some of the strongest human beings in their mind and spirit. Like, I interviewed one woman. She had been gang raped multiple times when she was 6 years old. Raped multiple times at 6 years old and gang raped at 15, and how she didn't let this break her, and the courage in this woman. She was just a warrior, and so many others like her. It was very illuminating for me. It taught me the immense capacity of the human spirit to transcend the adversities we all encounter. And I found so much peace in writing it, and wanted to share the lessons I had learned along the way with others who are suffering.
Speaking of suffering, you feel that there's a lot that we can learn from suffering, and
Mm-hmm.
there's things that we can do to turn suffering into a positive thing that propels us forward to things that are good and things that give us joy.
Yeah. There's even a chapter in the book called The Gift of Suffering. And that is, I think, the core teaching, if I had to summarize Fearvana, is to help people develop a positive relationship to suffering, and then use it to find, live, and love what I call your worthy struggle. That is your path in life. It could be running a podcast, writing a book, raising a child, skiing across Antarctica, whatever your path, right?
I love that.
But the foundation of that is to stop demonizing suffering as bad. We touched on this in the context of negative emotions, but it's the same thing with experiences. There's no bad or good experiences. There's only experiences. And we ascribe them as good or bad, often because of how much suffering they've induced. But when I look back on my life, all these experiences, both the highs, the lows, the summits, the valleys, they've all combined in this collage to create a higher version of me that I'm proud of who I am today. And I could not be here without that suffering. And now I actually actively seek it out. I mean, in the depths of suffering and solitude that I will experience in Antarctica, in that struggle, in that silence, you start to hear the voice of God. You hear and connect to things you don't otherwise connect in the distractions and the decadence of the mundane, So suffering is this access point to self-transcendence. It's this access point to shedding the masks we wear in the normal world and finding something within to transcend that suffering. So when you start viewing it as something beautiful, it becomes beautiful because how you relate to reality shapes your reality.
It's
and look,
that's
you're going to
amazing.
experience it in one way or another. We're all going to suffer. So instead of just waiting for life to inflict upon it, seek it. Seek it as a means of your evolution. I mean, you train. You have to put the body through stress for it to get stronger. It's the same way through the mind and the spirit. You put it through stress and then you adapt and then you grow. You evolve into that higher next version of yourself.
Brother, that is so deep. I just love that. One of the things I remember from your book, you said that perception is reality, and that ties right into that. Let's talk for a second about your mission, because I know that you have a mission, which is and I'm going to quote this: to help humanity explore the edges and fall in love with both play and suffering in order to create a life of greater meaning, joy, and fulfillment. I love that. Let's talk about that.
Thank you. Yeah, in my life experience through all these things, I've realized that in those edges, you start to tap into the depths of the human soul. You get to open the doors that aren't otherwise opened. And there you find the greatest treasures on earth. And going to the edges doesn't mean just the edge of suffering. It also means the edge of play, right? Like as a very concrete example, there was many years ago, I was on a run because I was running ultra marathons at the time. And I saw a sign that said 5K fun run. And I had visceral disgust at the idea of running for fun. Like, you don't run for fun. You have to suffer every run, And that wasn't healthy. Like, I had gotten to such a point where I developed such a comfort zone with suffering that I developed a negative relationship to doing things that were fun and playful and light. And I was bringing suffering into all areas of my life unnecessarily. So I started to go play on the other edge of, if you look at the duality of suffering and play, right? Use that as a spectrum. And there's a series of dualities, these polarities that encompass the human experience, like light and dark, masculine, feminine, your summits and your valleys, ego, humility. There's all these dualities that are part of the human experience, pleasure and pain. And if you look at the duality of suffering and play, I was thriving on that spectrum of suffering, but I went to the other edge of play. Like when we'd go to retreats, for example, and they would do these breaks where everybody would be dancing, I was more uncomfortable dancing than I would be doing like 100 burpees in the corner. So I needed to go play on that edge of doing light things, fun things, playful things, easy things. And doing that was a new edge for me. I felt more uncomfortable doing that than suffering. But because I did that, because I went on that edge, I now expanded my horizons into new places I hadn't been. So that's really what I want, because ultimately, what do we all seek in life? We're seeking to feel, as Joseph Campbell said, the rapture of being alive. You're to feel more awe in this human experience. And if you play on those edges, you will find, because you can only really appreciate a summit when you've been to a valley, in a very concrete way of this. Like when I spent those 10 days in darkness, and before that I did 7 days in darkness, and I came out and saw the light for the first time after being in pitch darkness, the way the world looked, like the way I saw the light, I had never seen the light shine that way. And in a very, very visceral way, I felt this gratitude for all the suffering I've ever experienced, knowing that you can never really see the light unless you've first been in the dark. So playing on those edges is how you appreciate the entire flavor of life. You need contrast to give life its full flavor.
Speaking of living on the edges, you're currently training for the first ever solo 110-day, 1,700-mile coast-to-coast crossing of Antarctica. I'd like to know how you're getting yourself ready for this. It's an amazing undertaking, and really, we want to hear all about it.
Thank you. So I'll start with the quote unquote easier part, if you will, which is the getting physically ready. Far from easy, but the easier, if you will, than the mental. Right now, as we speak, I'm up in Alaska. I'm training out here. I'm here all winter, where I'm going out with a sled, very heavy sled that I load up with a ton of weight and drag that essentially for hours on end on cross-country skis, because that's what I'll be doing in Antarctica. When I was in Arizona, which is where I live, I would drag tires around neighborhoods, just go around parks.
Now,
the tires would simulate the sled.
Now, actually, I gotta ask you this because you told me earlier that you have a condition where you're only getting about 75% of the normal amount of oxygen, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so,
I get less hemoglobin.
So I would say that's a challenge in and of itself, much less dragging a sled. So I can just imagine how rigorous your training has to be to build up your wind to be able to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, I've built a very strong foundation from running ultramarathons before and building up that aerobic capacity, through running, now through tire dragging, doing a lot of hiking. Because the nature of polar travel, it's a unique thing to train for. You need to train strength because you need to be very strong. I'll be dragging about a 400-pound sled with all my supplies to survive out there for 110 days. So food, fuel, tent, things of that nature. And I need to do endurance. I need to train endurance because I'll be dragging that sled for 12 hours a day. And I need to do all of this while I'm fat because I'll be at a huge caloric deficit while I'm out there. I'll be eating about 6,500 calories a day, but I'll be burning 8 to 10,000. So I'm going to lose a ton of weight when I'm out there. So I need fat as kind of insulation to lose, to have that weight to lose. And none of those three things, endurance, strength, and fat, don't go together, right? So it's a really unique beast to train for. I eat like a savage just to make sure I'm constantly putting on weight while I train at a very heavy volume.
Right.
So that's
you're going to be dragging your food and your water behind you, or do you melt the snow there for water?
I melt snow for water. So the heaviest thing in the sled is the food. The second heaviest is the fuel.
Okay, so the fuel to stoke whatever device you have for warmth, correct?
Exactly. Not for warmth so much as it is for just melting snow, because you don't have the luxury to waste fuel, right? Because it's so heavy. So I'm taking a bare minimum of what I need just to melt enough to get my water and essentially to eat the freeze-dried food that I'll be having out there.
So that was my next question about the food. It's freeze-dried to minimize weight, and I would imagine it's very calorically dense.
Yeah, so my breakfast and dinner will be freeze-dried meals with butter powder inside of them. On the go while I'm skiing, I will have chocolates and nuts, because nuts are heavy. And one of my friends, he's a supplement formula designer, so he made a custom supplement for me for Antarctica, which is just this beast of a supplement that has all kinds of things in there, because none of this diet is very healthy, right? So to get all my micronutrients, my multivitamins, your vegetables, things like that. So I got this beast of a supplement, and then part of it is just drinking straight oil. And then one of my favorite for sort of a morale food is jalapeno chips. There's nothing like jalapeno chips at the end of a long day of skiing and just coming into the tent and eating some of that salty flavor. That is heavenly. So that's my diet while I'm out there.
It's a reward.
Exactly.
That's great.
It feels very good. Yeah.
Are you gonna be connected by satellite phone or some kind of remote video?
Yeah, I'll have a satellite phone to stay connected to not only back home, but to a company called ALE, which is Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions. They're the ones that manage expeditions for all adventurers out there. So to check in with them, they have a base camp on Antarctica called Union Glacier, to stay connected with them as well. And there'll also be a live tracker that people can kind of follow along as I'm plodding my way across the continent.
Now you have a certain number of miles that you have to traverse each day, correct? So I would imagine that route is meticulously planned, but knowing that the conditions there change so much, is there a possibility that the topography could change with wind or with ice shifting and that kind of thing?
Not so much in terms of ice shifting or things like that, but you will get, what you get every season is going to vary to some degree. I could get, for example, more soft snow on the ice shelves where I start. And if you get more soft snow, that's going to be tough. Sometimes you're going to get more sastrugi. Sastrugi are these windswept formations of snow that make it very hard to ski over, because it's just kind of, instead of being a flat terrain, it's this kind of these wind blocks of snow essentially throughout the terrain that make it a little bit more challenging. So you're going to get what you get, whatever Antarctica throws at you. And I mean, one of the core tenets of doing something like this, or even navigating through the struggles of life, is the acceptance of isness, which is why even in Fearvana, the first section is titled Awareness and Acceptance. So the more you resist the isness of things, the more you create unnecessary suffering. So often when I'm out there, for example, if I get hammered by a storm, and the storms there are unforgiving, we're talking like minus 30 degrees, minus 40 degrees, hurricane force winds hammering you, right? And it's very easy to then get caught in this trap of saying, I hope there won't be a storm tomorrow. But instead of doing that, because you can't control the weather, I'll just say, I hope tomorrow the weather will be what it is. 100% of the time I get what I want, because the weather will be exactly
you can't
what
lose
it
with
is.
that perspective, can you?
Exactly. So it's the same thing in life. You can't, a lot of life we can't control. So the core, this is coming to the mental preparation of this, is learning to accept the isness of whatever the reality is. Even when I'm going out and skiing for hours on end, there's days I don't want to go, and when you're out there, it's hard. But the more you resist the terrain, the more you resist the internal feeling, the physical feeling, instead of just acceptance of what is, the more you create unnecessary suffering. And simply by accepting it and being fully with it, you free yourself from the prison of the mind. And you find, and it doesn't mean you're not going to suffer, but you don't create that unnecessary suffering, and you find peace even in that pain.
Perception is reality.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, are you going to document this? Is there going to be some videography and that type of thing for a documentary?
We are creating a documentary around this. Not like when I'm in Antarctica, I'll be completely alone. So I'll just be filming with a GoPro, kind of doing video journals. But the documentary crew, they're actually coming out to Alaska in 2 weeks to film out here. They filmed me in the Arctic, in Iceland, in Arizona training. They came to Mexico to come to film me coming out of the 10 days of darkness. So we've accumulated a wealth of footage on all the training expeditions so far. And then Antarctica will be the final one to see. I'm saying 110 days alone out there. So, I'll be kind of documenting my descent into madness, if you will.
Absolutely.
And that will set the foundation for the storyline.
So how are you going to deal not only with the physical challenges, but the mental challenges of being alone for 110 days? I know you've been in darkness for 10 days at a time. Mm-hmm. But now you're talking about being alone, it's solitary for 110 days. Have you ever been alone for stretches that are that long?
Not that long. Later this year, in about 2 months, I'm going to Iceland to spend 35 days on a solo trip. I was on 2 separate 10-day solo trips in the Arctic earlier this year. And of course, as you mentioned, the darkness retreats where I spend 10 days in complete darkness and isolation. So those are all training grounds. But the key to preparing for that level of solitude is you're going to spend a lot of time with yourself. So over the years of all these things I've done, I've developed a very strong relationship with myself, so I can be with that, to the point that I'm actually really looking forward to the solitude, because I can't wait to see what will be revealed to me in that silence. As I said earlier, right, in silence, one of the many draws of even going on this expeditions is that silence, and the ability to, when you're out there in these places, to me, call it what you want, the universe, consciousness, but you're hearing God, and you get to hear these things in such profundity, like that. I can't wait to hear what messages are revealed to me in the depths of that silence. So I think I'm actually really excited about that part of it. I'm
excited for you. And that part of it sounds absolutely wonderful. It's a spiritual journey as well.
Exactly.
And you have mentioned God several times during our interview. How does your faith play into this?
For me, my version of what God is, and this is not to say it's right, we all have our own relationship to God. I don't necessarily ascribe to a higher power God. I believe God is the essence of the human spirit at its finest. It's that ability, that thing we have inside of us. Why do we cry when we see human beings suffering? Why do we feel that compassion? What is it that allows us to do these incredible, have you seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge?
I have.
Yeah. Desmond Doss, he pulled 75 people off a cliff in World War II, sometimes dragging them as far as a football field.
It was an amazing movie.
It's an amazing movie. And after each person, he would say, please God, help me save one more. What he did was impossible, and he did it. And that to me is an expression of God shining through us. Right. So this is not to say, again, my version is right, but it's my version of what I believe God to be. So it's kind of awakening our own inner Buddhahood. In Buddhism, they say we all have that Buddhahood inside of us, right? That ability to transcend our mere mortal selves, our mind, our body, to do something extraordinary, to strive in service of something greater. And so that is my own fate, to tap into that spirit. Because, we as individuals can only do so much, but when you surrender to something greater, whatever you want to call it, again, however you relate to it, you're tapping into a limitless pool. And it's calling forth sort of the spirits of every soul that has come before us, this higher spirit to do something that is beyond what you even think is possible. And so it's kind of a faith in that limitless capacity that I've I've got caught glimpses of throughout my lifetime playing on these edges. And you read these stories of, like the Desmond Doss and so many others, who achieve impossible feats, who strive for just something so grand. And so it's faith that we can each tap into that, and we have this limitless pool to do something greater than ourselves.
That's just an amazing perspective. Let me ask you something that I think is on all of our minds, and that is, if you get into this, and let's say that you run into basically insurmountable challenges, is there a plan B? Is there someone to come and get you?
Yeah, with that sat phone, for about 80-90% of the journey, rescue is possible. There's only 2 glaciers where a plane cannot land. But if something goes horribly wrong, for example, I don't know, let's say I break a bone out there, I could theoretically set up a tent and wait for a rescue. So when I was in Antarctica 2 years ago and I got frostbite and lost 2 of my fingers, because the frostbite got bad, we after climbing this glacier called the Axel Heiberg, we finished the climb, and then the fingers got frostbite, and we waited, and a team came and got me out. The plane flew and got me out.
Right, and I know that won't be the case, but we're curious, obviously.
Of course, understandable. It's a good question, and it's a very valid,
because
one.
The conditions in a place like that are not unlike, similarities, let's say, to going into outer space, meaning that it's very hostile, and extremes of temperatures, and albeit the extremes of temperature are higher in outer space, but I'm just saying that it's not like you can just pull the ripcord, and go into the safety of a house or something,
Not so much, yeah. Because even if you're calling a rescue, it depends on good weather, when they could fly out. It's not exactly somebody just magically comes overnight, right?
Right.
The temperatures are unforgiving. It's savage, and to me, that's the biggest draw. Like, one of the biggest draws of Antarctica versus, let's say, some of the other things I've done, is that polar travel is not as dangerous as, let's say, mountain climbing or free soloing, but it's far more suffering because you're dragging this heavy sled with no stimuli on the terrain. So unlike when you're climbing a mountain every day, the view is different, the terrain is different, the days are different. But in Antarctica, almost every day is the exact same, empty white nothingness. There's no stimuli to engage you. And you're doing the exact same thing, the monotony of dragging that extremely heavy sled in this, absolute stillness. So it's mentally just draining. And so that depth of physical and mental and spiritual suffering, to me, is the draw. Not this, to clarify, not the suffering in and of itself. It's what that suffering gives me access to, because you have to battle the dragon to find the treasure. And out there, you're battling some of the biggest dragons you can find.
You have to battle the dragon to find the treasure. Akshay, we talked earlier, and you mentioned that you were in the midst of fundraising for the expedition. So for those of our viewers that want to, come along with you and contribute, where would they find information on how they can become part of the expedition?
Thank you for asking. You can find information at greatsoulcrossing.com. That's great. Soul, SOUL, crossing.com. We do have a crowdfunding campaign. It costs $750,000 to pull this off. I'm not making a single dollar off that campaign. It's all going towards that company I mentioned, ALE, to fund the team, the logistics, the flights to some of these most remote corners of the globe, the medical staff. It's quite a feat logistically as well as mentally and physically. And in addition to the crowdfunding campaign at different donation tiers, I'm giving access to sort of all the mindset training I've developed over decades of playing on these edges to help you move through whatever struggles you're going through, and how I've been mentally training for Antarctica and all these other things. So at different donation tiers, we're giving away access to some of that stuff just as a thank you and to be a part of this journey, because collectively this doesn't happen alone. I'm alone on the ice, but it has already taken an army of people to pull this off. It takes an army more. We've raised $203,000 so far, with more coming. And it's every single person that contributes is coming together to pull off this historical feat.
It's very, very exciting. Very exciting.
Thank you, brother.
And I wish you continued luck with the training. Actually, this has just been simply amazing. And the time that you've shared with us today has been inspirational, to say the least. So I'm just really happy. Hey guys, Be sure to get Akshay's new book, Fearvana, on Amazon. It is worth the read. It's just an amazing book. And guys, help us to grow the Lee Labrada Show by sharing this podcast with one of your friends. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and leave your comments and feedback below. All right, you guys, stay motivated, get up, and look up. God bless you.
The Lee Labrada Show.
You're moving me, oh Lord. I just wanna change.